Well, 2016, we've been, as our theme for this year, been reflecting on people who have done some bad things in their lives. And we've called this series The Dirty Dozen, 12 Character Flaws. And for me, it's been deep and rich, and I look forward every first Sunday to sharing with you another message. And so, today, if I turn this on, it'll work. Here we go. Today, we're going to be talking about relying on riches. I'm going to ask you who you think this character is in a moment, but what are you trusting in to make it every day? Be honest with yourself. Are you trusting in your skills and your abilities, your intelligence? Are you trusting in your family or your connections or your networks? Are you trusting in your bank account, if you have anything in it? As believers, it's easy to say that we are trusting in God. After all, that is the right answer, right? Amen. But what does our practice show? Are we relying on retirement income? That's a bad idea. Are we relying on our salaries? Are we relying on the stuff that we have collected over the years? Do you have a rainy day account or a secret stash? Are you still putting money away in your mattress? There's nothing wrong with planning for the future or saving, but when you become greedy, stingy, miserly, and self-serving, well, that's a whole different story. If you know me, then you know who my favorite Warner Brothers cartoon character is. Anybody know? Who? What was that? No, that is that's Edwin, not me. No, actually, no, he's Taz. But Daffy Duck is my favorite Warner Brothers character. And my son, Cannell, had this shirt specially made for me because he knows how much I love Daffy. Now, I have to explain that because because Daffy is quite the character. Daffy, well, let me explain it by sharing with you one episode. In this cartoon, people are trying to catch Taz, the Tasmanian devil. And there's a reward for catching him. And if you know anything about Daffy, it's that he loves money. And so he's trying to come up with a scheme to catch this Tasmanian devil so that he can get the reward. And somewhere along the line, he hears that music calms the savage beast. And so he goes through all these different things to try to make music to get Taz to calm down so that he can put him in a cage and take him for the reward. And all kinds of things happen along the way, but he finally gets Taz to where he can get the reward. And as he leaves, he's counting his money. And there's the cage where they have put Taz. And as he's counting his money, a big gust of wind comes and blows $1 into that cage. Now, Daffy doesn't fight. Daffy is afraid. But that dollar's in that cage. And Daffy gets in that cage, fights with Taz, comes out of the cage, and you know what he says? I'm a coward, but I'm a greedy little coward. And that's one of the things that I think about. And at my house, I don't have a shrine, but I have a collection of Daffy stuff. Mets and Daffy. And I have this globe. And if you check this globe out, you see that he's holding a dollar. And along with snow, you see these dollar signs floating around. And it says, mine, all mine. And why he is well, there are two reasons. One I'm not going to tell you. You can ask him later, I'll tell you why. But the main reason why he is my favorite character is because he reminds me not to be greedy. He reminds me that we all have this tendency. We all could go down that road. But when I think about Daffy, he's like kind of like my alter ego. I could be there if I allow myself to be. But I don't want to be like that. So Daffy's my friend to remind me of where I don't want to be. And you can kind of pass that around if you want to, just as long as you don't steal it from me. Because it's mine, all mine. Well, Jesus had something to say about greed. You see, being greedy is a character flaw. So, can you guess who the character is that I have selected for relying on riches? Anybody have a guess?
The fool that amassed all of the fine things and said he's going to, I forget, I don't even know if he had a name.
No, he didn't have a name.
Yeah. But the fool.
Not the rich young ruler, but the rich fool. The parable of the rich fool. And as I tried to find somebody who represents greed, he's the first one that came to my mind. A perfect example. So turn to Luke chapter 12, verses 13 through 21, as we look at the rich fool relying on riches. Luke chapter 12, verses 13 through 21. Then one from the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." But he said to him, "Man, who made me a judge or an arbitrator over you?" And he said to them, "Take heed and beware of covetousness or greed, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of the things he possesses." Then he spoke a parable to them, saying, "The ground of a certain rich man yielded plentifully. And he thought within himself, saying, 'What shall I do, since I have no room to store my crops?' So he said, 'I will do this. I will pull down my barns and build greater, and there I will store all my crops and my goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, you have many goods laid up for your many years. Take your ease. Eat, drink, and be merry.' But God said to him, 'Fool, this night your soul will be required of you. Then whose will those things be which you have provided? So is he who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God.'" Well, as I reflect on this, three things come to my mind. We see Jesus doing three things in this passage. The first thing is that Jesus warns about greed. He warns about greed in verses 13 through 15. But to understand this, we need to look at the context. And the context is seen back at the beginning of the chapter. verse 1 of chapter 12. It says, in the meantime, when an innumerable multitude of people had gathered together so that they trampled one another, he began to say to his disciples, first off, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees, which is hypocrisy. And then we see that Jesus begins to teach the crowd. Remember, there is a bunch of people that can't even be numbered. So this is like wall-to-wall people. So you have that in your mind because you need to keep that in your mind. And so what happens when we come to verse 13? Then one from the crowd. Now, there's this whole crowd of people, and Jesus is teaching the people. And this one joker butts in. You know, so he's not thinking about the crowd. He's not thinking about what Jesus was doing. He's thinking only about himself. So he interrupts Jesus' classroom with all these hundreds and maybe thousands of people around. He probably worked his way up through the crowd and he got up front. And what does he say? Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me. Now, Jesus is teaching about stuff for the soul. Has he been paying attention? Have you had that experience like in class? A teacher is teaching on the subject, and somebody raises their hand, and the teacher says, yeah, and they ask something off the wall. Has nothing to do with what the teacher is teaching. That's what this dude is doing. Jesus is trying to teach them about dealing with false teaching, the leaven of the Pharisees, along with other things. And it's like, this guy's not paying attention. So, Jesus responds to him, man, I can just, if that was me. Yo, dude, what's wrong with you? Who made me a judge or an arbitrator over you? Now, when it says teacher, it could also say rabbi, because rabbi means teacher. And so this man from the crowd steps up front and he addresses Jesus as the rabbi. And he says, Rabbi, make my brother share the inheritance with me. Now, a rabbi, as a teacher, could be called on to settle family disputes. So what he was doing in that sense is not wrong. It's just the wrong place and the wrong time and the wrong person, because Jesus is not concerned about these kind of mundane things. He's concerned about spiritual things. So Jesus responds, who made me the judge and arbitrator over your family stuff? That's not my calling. And so he says, oh, by the way, it says arbitrator over you, and that you is plural. So it makes me think, was the other brother in the crowd too? Was he present when this particular brother is saying, make him share the inheritance with me? Now, we have no idea what was going on in that family. And when it comes to inheritance and death and that kind of stuff, family members can get ugly. They can start fighting over stuff. And we see it today. Well, it happened in the Bible days. I mean, it happened all the way back in the book of Genesis. People fighting over inheritance. And so Jesus said, why are you bringing this mess to me? And then Jesus uses this as a teaching moment. You see how cool Jesus is? And so he's talking to this one guy, but now he's going to address the whole innumerable multitude. And this is what he says. Take heed and beware of covetousness, for one's life does not consists in the abundance of the things he possesses. So Jesus says, warning, greed is bad. Pay attention. This is taking or can take you down the wrong road. What you need to do is lay up treasures in heaven. This was self-centered because he intruded upon this huge crowd to try to get his needs met. But Jesus says, no, I'm not getting involved. Guard your heart. Not just you, but all of you. And as he's speaking to this crowd, you know he's speaking to you and me too. Amen. He's telling you and me that we need to guard our heart because greed is a dangerous thing. And not only that, life is more than the toys you have. Some people define themselves by what they have. You know, that expression of keeping up with the Joneses comes from feeling competition with your neighbor. You know, when your neighbor got a new car, you have to get one to keep up with them. Why? You don't want them to outdo you. Why? I mean, why is getting a new car because somebody else has a new car is important? You know, obviously they can afford it. Maybe you can't. So you're going to add some car payments because you want to keep up with them. Now, they don't do that so much today, especially this young generation, because they'll drive anything. They don't care. But how many of you remember back in the day, that's what people did? They were trying to keep up with the Joneses. Jesus is saying, life is not about the things that you have. So what if you have a nice home, a big home? So what if you have 2 cars? So what? What does that matter? Your life is more than the things that you have. And sometimes we don't get that message because we keep chasing after things, after things, after things. We're looking for things that will make us feel good, that will satisfy our soul. Do you realize that there's nothing in this world that will give you true satisfaction? Whatever you think might give you satisfaction, it will get old, it will break, it could be stolen, it will prove not to satisfy, and so you go on to the next thing. If you are motivated by trying to find things to fill that void in your life, you will continue to be empty. Jesus says, your life is more than the things that you have. Now, let's be honest. We all have some things, right? Don't we have things? Amen. We have our trinkets and our toys, and if somebody mess with it, we get upset. Look, I'm not just talking to myself. I mean, I got a whole cabinet full of DVDs. And why is it in the cabinet? Because I don't want nobody messing with them. But you know, when I die, I can't take them with me. They're not going to do me any good. So why don't I have more of a sharing heart and letting people share in the things that I have come to love and appreciate? We have things, believe me. But we can't allow those things to define who we are. Because we are more than the things that we have. That's Jesus' point. So he warns everybody about greed. But, you know, some people will say, I'm not greedy. That's not me. I share with people. So Jesus gives an illustration. Some of us, we need to have it in story form to really get it. And so Jesus tells a parable. Verse 16. Then he spoke a parable to them, saying, the ground of a certain rich man yielded plentifully. So the first thing we need to see is that the ground of this rich man, he's already rich, right? And if he's rich, it means that he has enough stuff already. He's not hurting. He's not wanting for anything. But his ground yielded abundance in this particular year, which means he had a bumper crop. He already has a whole lot of stuff, but now he has so much more. Now, when you have more than what you need, what should you do? No, that's not what he said. He didn't say anything about sharing. I don't see that word in here. Verse 17 says, and he thought within himself, saying, what shall I do, since I have no room to store my crops? See, he has a hoarding mentality. I don't have enough room to store all of this good stuff that I have. Does that sound like us anytime? Verse 18, so he said, I will do this. I will pull down my barns. See, now again, this is showing us how rich he is. He didn't just have one barn. Now, you know, I grew up in New York City. And my parents were from North Carolina. And in the summer, they didn't want me to be in the city for fear that I might get in trouble. So they sent me to North Carolina to work on my grandmother's tobacco farm. And that wasn't easy work. And toward the end of the season, just before I had to come back for school, they did something called hanging tobacco. I know y'all don't know what that is, but you put these tobacco leaves on these long tobacco sticks, and then you go to the barn and you hang them in the rafters, and then they cure in there for several months, and then they can take it to the market to be sold. My grandmother had one barn. She didn't have many barns. She had one barn. And what I knew about down south is you had a barn. Every farm had a barn. This guy has many barns, which means he's rolling. He's rolling in the dough. But he's not satisfied with what he has. He says, this is what I'll do. I have so much stuff that I'm going to pull down my barns. I'm going to build bigger barns, plural. So you need to understand that this guy has much, much, much stuff. And he ain't thinking about nobody else. So, what did Jesus say in this parable? Verse 19. And I will say to my soul, see, he's not even talking to other people. He's still talking to himself. That's how selfish this guy is. He's talking to himself. Soul, you have many goods laid up for many years. Take your ease. Chill. You can chill now. You got so much stuff, you can chill. You can retire. You don't have to work hard anymore. Eat and drink. Man, you have so much stuff, you can indulge in the pleasures of life. You know, you've worked hard all this time. Now you can really indulge in the good things of life. And be merry. Oh, I can party now. I can really get it going. So you see, he says he could rest. He could eat and drink. He could celebrate. He has not included anybody else. All this stuff. But then we come to verse 20. And remember, this is a parable that Jesus is telling. But God said to him, now, before I read the next word, sometimes we want God to talk to us, don't we? God, I need an answer from you. God, I need help. I need direction. But when God speaks to you unbidden, it's usually because you're in trouble. God said to him, fool! Now we call this the parable of the rich fool. We know he's rich, but it's God who declares him to be a fool. And if God calls you a fool, boy, you're in trouble. You don't have a leg to stand on. And so he says, fool, this night your soul will be required of you. Then whose will those things be which you have provided? Here's why he's a fool. Because he's gathered all this stuff, and he's even planning to enjoy it for the rest of his life. He says, no, you have stuff laid up for many years to come. You can retire. You can enjoy life. You can do all this stuff. You can party now. And God says, you're going to die tonight. Your life is going to come to an end. And you have all this stuff that you have gathered up, and you can't take it with you. So what's going to happen to all that stuff that you have collected? You have been greedy all your life. You have focused on yourself. You have not done good for anybody else. You have worked and collected and hoarded and saved to the point where you are very, very rich. But you can't take it with you. You have been blessed, but you have not become a blessing. You're a fool. Can you imagine, and you probably know people like this, who worked hard and hard and hard and hard all their lives, and they wanted to have some of the finer things in life, and so they worked overtime, they worked triple time, they worked 2 and 3 jobs. And they get to the point where they can retire and they don't even last a year. They die because they pushed their bodies too far. They got all this stuff, but it literally killed them. And we shake our heads and say, that is pitiful. He didn't even get a chance to enjoy all that stuff. And that's what God says to this fool. You have gathered all this stuff. You have become rich and wealthy and self-focused and not thinking about anybody else. And now you're going to die before you even get a chance to really enjoy it. That's a fool. But that is a result of being greedy, of focusing on yourself. So, now go back to the crowd that he's talking to. Well, go back to the individual that he's talking to. And Jesus' point is that being rich doesn't stop death. You know, you can't buy your way out of death. He didn't make any preparations for eternity. He had no plans to share. He had no generosity. And so, do you think this man who came up to Jesus and said, "Teacher, make my brother share with me"? Jesus tells this parable to uncover what was in his heart. Again, we don't know what the family dynamics were, but we can tell because of this parable that he was being greedy. He was being selfish and self-centered and not thinking about anybody else. So Jesus makes a conclusion. Verse 21. So is he who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. Bam. What does it mean to be greedy? It means that I'm collecting stuff just for me. This man wanted to collect stuff just for him. He felt that his brother was cheating him out of something that should be his, and he wanted more. But he was only thinking about himself and what he wanted to do with that more. But there were people in the crowd who were dealing with issues of greed. And dare I say it, you and I have to deal with issues of greed too. And Jesus says, you are a fool if you are just laying up treasures for yourself and you are not rich toward God. Now, what does it mean to be rich toward God? You can't give God anything that he needs. He owns everything, right? So, being rich toward God, you can't say, okay, God, don't give you my car like he needs your car. God doesn't drive because he's everywhere. All right, God, I'll give you my home. He has heaven. He doesn't need your rackety shack. So what does it mean to be rich toward God? What can I give him? Well, I'll give more money to church. Is that being rich towards God? What is it that God wants from you and me? He wants our heart. Remember, this guy was saying, soul. I mean, he was doing soul talk. He said, soul. You have so much stuff. But what did God say? Your soul is required of you today. You're going to die. What God wants from us is for us to willingly give our hearts, our souls to him. I think that we have the impression sometimes in the Christian life that if I give God this, if I go to church a certain amount of time, he'll be pleased with me. If I give X amount of money to the church, I get God off of my back. But Matthew 6, verses 19 through 21 tells us that we are to lay up treasures in heaven. That's how we can be rich toward God. Now, what are the treasures that we can lay up in heaven? When you share your faith with someone and they come to faith in Jesus Christ, you're laying up treasures in heaven. When God has gifted you with spiritual gifts and you are using it not so that you could strut around and say, look how good I am, but you're doing it for God's glory, you're laying up treasures in heaven. When you are an encouragement to somebody else, when they're down, you're laying up treasures in heaven. When somebody's sharing with you how they are hurting, and you pray for them and pray with them, you're laying up treasures in heaven. When you have ever encouraged somebody, just sending them a card, I've been thinking about you, you're laying up treasures in heaven. You know why? Because you're not thinking about yourself. You're thinking about someone else. Now, I sign my letters, serving Christ by serving others, which is a reminder to me that the way I serve God is I can't jump up high enough to reach heaven, say, okay, Lord, how can I help you up here? He said, I haven't even called you here yet. You got work to do down there. Stay there. So how can I serve you down here? I serve God by serving those around me. And when I serve with the right heart attitude, I'm laying up treasures in heaven. That's where it's going to be. Because you know how it is down here. You can do some good things and nice things to people, and they don't even care. They don't even say thank you. They don't even give you any kind of feedback or recognition. But that's okay, because you're laying up treasures in heaven. God sees everything. And every good thing that we do, he notes it. And he's the one who will give the reward. So that's how we are laying up treasures in heaven. And James 1:17 tells us every good and perfect gift comes from God. We are laying up treasures in heaven when we act like him. When we give good gifts to others. We are being a blessing to others, and we're being like him. Oh, by the way, poor people can be greedy. You know, this is the parable of the rich fool. So some of you say, oh, I'm off the hook. Nobody can mistake me for being rich. But poor people can be greedy. They don't have much, but they want what you got. They're always thinking and scheming and plotting about how they can get more. When you focus on yourself, you're being greedy. Let's be honest, folks. Our human tendency is to think about ourselves. Well, I'm not getting just due, and, you know, I feel like they're cheating me, and so I got to figure out how I'm going to get more, rather than leaving it in the Lord's hands. So, remember this. Cure greed with generosity. Cure greed with generosity. Are you a generous person? Or are you like Daffy Duck, trying to get all that you can get? Greed makes us uncaring and unloving. We become self-centered and selfish. Our possessions can try to possess us, making us unavailable to serve the Lord. You know what I mean by that? You got a nice home, but you got to keep it up. You got to make those mortgage payments, so you got to work. Oh, that means I got to work on Sunday too, because I got to keep those mortgage payments up. You know, all the things that I have, well, you know, my Sabbath day is Sunday, which means I've done work for 6 days. And Sunday is the only day that I have to myself. Isn't that a selfish statement already? Sunday is the only day I have for myself. And so I work for the man 6 days, and Sunday I'm going to sleep late. I'm going to eat in bed if somebody will feed me. I'm going to turn the TV on. I'm going to chill out right here. I'm going to do some binge watching on Sunday. I got to catch up on all my shows. I just can't make it to church today. You see, you're focusing on yourself. And the things that you have can start to control you. And so you've got to keep up your payments. You got to work extra. You can't afford to leave because you got to protect the things that you have because you're afraid somebody's going to take it. You see, your possessions are possessing you. That kind of mindset makes us unavailable to serve the Lord. Well, I would come to church more. I would hang out. I would do these outreach things, but I'm just so busy. Oh, I'm so tired. The Lord will understand. Yeah, he understands better than you do. And so what are we going to do about it? Where is greed seeping into your life? Seek to share more with others than to take care of yourself. This week, ask the Lord to show you where you have become selfish and then determined to be generous. Give something away. I produced a card to remind you of this message, and there are 4 reminders on it to avoid greed. It says, don't be greedy. 1, beware of greedy tendencies. 2, don't just save for yourself. 3, be generous toward others. And 4, lay up treasures in heaven. If you're not a Christian, is money or your possessions your God? Are you relying on what you can get rather than relying on Him? Jesus makes it clear that your things will not be with you in death. You need to be concerned about the state of your soul. Are you prepared to die? You will be if you confess your sins and receive Jesus as your Savior. Let us not be greedy.